Malcolm Reed had rehearsed this morning in his head 3 different ways. Option 1, everything goes smooth. He hands over the paperwork, smiles politely, leaves with a start date, and takes his daughter for pancakes as a celebration. Option 2, there's a missing form. Annoying, but fixable. He pulls it up, signs, keeps moving. Option 3, the one he didn't want to admit he was preparing for, was the one where people decided the problem was him before they even opened the folder. Malcolm didn't like living in option 3, but he had learned not to pretend it didn't exist. He parked in the visitor lot of Brookside Elementary at 8:12 a.m., engine ticking as it cooled. The school looked like most schools did. Brick walls, a painted mural, a flag snapping in the wind, a row of small backpacks bouncing toward the front doors. Parents, mostly white, clustered in little knots, talking about schedules and sports and which teacher was strict but good. Malcolm stepped out of his car with a manila folder tucked under one arm and his daughter's hand in his other. Aaliyah was 6. Bright eyes, neat braids, a purple backpack that looked too big for her small frame. She wore her first day sneakers, even though today wasn't her first day yet. She'd insisted. "Daddy," she whispered, looking at the building like it might judge her. "Are they gonna like me?" Malcolm squeezed her hand gently. "They're gonna love you," he said, voice warm and steady. "And if they don't, that's their problem, not yours." Aaliyah nodded like she wanted to believe him so badly it hurt. Malcolm's stomach tightened anyway. He walked them inside. The lobby smelled like waxed floors and crayons. A large banner said, "Welcome back in cheerful colors." A glass window separated the main hall from the front office, where a receptionist desk sat under a row of framed certificates. 2 white women moved behind the glass, one at a computer, one sorting papers. Malcolm approached the counter. A sign on the desk read, "All visitors must sign in." He wrote his name carefully. Malcolm Reed. He wrote enrollment in the reason column. He wrote Aaliyah's name too, because he'd learned that spelling mattered. The woman at the computer looked up through the glass. White, late 30s, tidy cardigan, hair pulled into a smooth clip. Her name tag said, Mrs. Dalton, front office. Her smile flickered on, polite but cautious, the kind of smile that didn't reach the eyes. "Good morning," Mrs. Dalton said. "Can I help you?" "Yes," Malcolm replied calmly. "I'm here to finalize enrollment for my daughter, Aaliyah Reed. We moved into the district last month. I submitted the registration packet online and dropped off the physical copies last week." Aaliyah stood close to Malcolm's side, quiet, holding her backpack strap. Mrs. Dalton's fingers tapped at her keyboard. "Date of birth." Malcolm gave it. She typed again. Her eyes narrowed slightly at the screen. Then she said, flat, "I'm not seeing her." Malcolm blinked once. "Not seeing her in the system." Mrs. Dalton kept typing, sharper now. "Not seeing an enrollment. Not seeing a registration packet." Malcolm felt a chill slide through his chest. He didn't let it show. "I submitted it," Malcolm said evenly. "And I dropped the packet off in person. I handed it to someone here at the office." Mrs. Dalton's expression shifted into something mildly annoyed, like Malcolm had complicated her morning. "Well, if it isn't here, it wasn't received." Malcolm held her gaze calmly. "It was received. I was told you timestamp packets when they're dropped off." Mrs. Dalton's lips pressed together. "We do, when they're properly submitted." The sentence landed like a quiet insult. Properly submitted. Malcolm kept his voice steady. "It was properly submitted. I have copies. I can provide them right now." Mrs. Dalton sighed. "Sir, we have procedures. If you didn't complete them, we can't enroll her today." Aaliyah's hand tightened on Malcolm's fingers. Malcolm glanced down at her, then back up. Today is the first week of school. She needs to start. Mrs. Dalton's eyes flicked briefly to Aaliyah, then back to Malcolm like Aaliyah was a detail, not a child. We can't place a student without an active file. You'll have to come back when you have everything. Malcolm's jaw tightened. He opened the manila folder and slid it under the glass slot carefully. Birth certificate copy, immunization record, proof of address, his ID copy, the completed district enrollment forms. He kept his movements slow and respectful, because he knew fast movements could become a story. Here are the physical copies, Malcolm said. This is the same packet I dropped off. Mrs. Dalton glanced at the papers without touching them, as if paper could be contagious. We don't accept walk-in packets without an appointment, she said. Malcolm's eyes narrowed slightly. Last week, I was told to drop it off. I did. Mrs. Dalton's smile returned, thin. Who told you that? Malcolm didn't take the bait. Someone in this office. The packet was received. Mrs. Dalton tapped her keyboard again and leaned back in her chair, posture firming into authority. I'm sorry. There's nothing here. Aaliyah shifted behind Malcolm, and he heard the quiet hitch of her breath. Malcolm's chest tightened, but his voice stayed calm. Can you check the intake log, the timestamp ledger, the drop-off bin? Mrs. Dalton's eyes lifted, like Malcolm had asked for something unreasonable. We don't have time to go digging around because you think you dropped something off. Malcolm went very still. That phrase, because you think, wasn't about paperwork. It was about credibility. He could feel it, the assumption that he was confused, careless, lying, or trying to force a shortcut. He'd done none of those things. He took a slow breath and kept his tone even. I don't think I dropped it off. I did, and your office stamps packets when they receive them. Mrs. Dalton's voice cooled. Sir, if you continue to argue, I'll have to ask you to step aside. We have phones ringing and parents waiting. Malcolm glanced behind him. There were two white parents at the lobby chairs, sipping coffee from paper cups, watching like this was mild entertainment. A white dad in a polo shirt glanced up from his phone and then looked away quickly, like he didn't want to be seen looking. Malcolm turned back to the glass. He lowered his voice, not threatening, precise. I'm not arguing. I'm requesting you verify your own intake process. My daughter is eligible. We live in the district. Her paperwork was submitted on time. Mrs. Dalton's expression hardened. If you lived in the district, she would already be in the system. Malcolm felt the anger flare, quick, hot. He swallowed it down. We moved 2 blocks from here, Malcolm said calmly. I can show you the lease. I can show utility bills. Mrs. Dalton's eyes flicked to the papers again like she didn't care. Sir, it doesn't matter what you show me if the packet isn't logged. Malcolm stared at her for a beat, then said steady. Please get your registrar. Mrs. Dalton's mouth tightened. Our registrar is busy. Malcolm nodded once. Then I'll wait. Mrs. Dalton's eyes narrowed. Mr. Reed. Yes, Malcolm said. Her tone turned sharp with performative politeness. Waiting doesn't create an enrollment packet. Malcolm's voice stayed low and controlled. No, but it might make you look. Mrs. Dalton's cheeks flushed. Excuse me? Malcolm didn't raise his voice. I'm asking you to check the timestamp records. If the packet was received, it will be stamped. If it was stamped, then it exists. And if it exists, then my daughter is being denied for no reason. The lobby felt suddenly quieter, like the room leaned in. Mrs. Dalton stared at Malcolm, and in that stare Malcolm felt the old familiar thing, the calculation of how much resistance she was willing to tolerate from someone who looked like him. Finally, she snapped. Fine. She stood abruptly, pushed through a door behind the counter, and disappeared into the back office. Malcolm stayed still. Aaliyah looked up at him, eyes glossy. Daddy, Am I not gonna go here? Malcolm crouched slightly so his face was level with hers. His smile was gentle, but his eyes were serious. You are going here, he said quietly. This is just grown-up stuff, okay? Aaliyah nodded, but her lip trembled. Malcolm stood again, shoulders relaxed on purpose. He could hear muffled voices through the office door, Mrs. Dalton's quick, annoyed tone, and another voice deeper and slower. Then the door opened. A white woman in her 40s walked out with Mrs. Dalton behind her. This woman wore a lanyard with keys and had the brisk posture of someone used to controlling schedules. Her name tag read, Mrs. Klein, Registrar. Mrs. Klein didn't smile. She looked straight at Malcolm like he was a case file. Mr. Reed? She asked. Yes, Malcolm replied. Miss Klein spoke calmly, but there was an edge. Mrs. Dalton says you're insisting you dropped off a packet. Malcolm nodded once. I did. Last Wednesday, I was told it would be time-stamped. Miss Klein's eyes narrowed. We don't lose packets. Malcolm held her gaze. Then it should be easy to find. Mrs. Dalton stood behind Miss Klein with her arms folded, lips pressed together like she'd already won. Miss Klein leaned forward over the counter and looked at the papers Malcolm had slid under the glass. She finally touched them, flipping through with quick, practiced movements. These are copies, Miss Klein said. Yes, Malcolm replied. The originals were dropped off. These are my duplicates. Miss Klein's mouth tightened. If we didn't timestamp it, it wasn't received. Malcolm's voice stayed calm, but it sharpened. Then check the timestamp log. Klein stared at him for a long beat, then turned slightly toward a filing cabinet behind the counter. Mrs. Dalton, Miss Klein said, clipped. Check the intake drawer from last Wednesday. Mrs. Dalton's eyes widened. We already looked. Miss Klein cut her off. Check again. Mrs. Dalton's jaw tightened, but she moved. She pulled open a drawer stuffed with manila folders, loose forms, and stamped packets. She began flipping through them, faster and faster, like speed could prove Malcolm wrong. Malcolm watched her hands. He watched the way her face tightened as she encountered something that didn't fit her story. Then Mrs. Dalton stopped. Her fingers froze on a packet. She lifted it slowly, and Malcolm saw it immediately. His own neat handwriting on the front, his daughter's name, his phone number. A red ink stamp on the top right corner. Received August 14th, 10:07 a.m. time-stamped. Official. Undeniable. Mrs. Dalton's face went pale in a way that made the whole lobby seem to hold its breath. Miss Klein stepped closer, snatched the packet gently but firmly, and read the stamp. Then she looked at Mrs. Dalton, voice quiet and sharp. So it was received. Mrs. Dalton swallowed. It must have been misfiled. Malcolm didn't move. He didn't smile. He just looked at Miss Klein and said calmly, So can we enroll her now? Miss Klein's eyes flicked to Aaliyah, finally seeing her. Really seeing her. Aaliyah stood straight, trying to be brave, clutching her purple backpack. Miss Klein's expression shifted, tight professionalism cracking into something like reluctant correction. Yes, Miss Klein said, voice clipped. We can. Mrs. Dalton didn't look at Malcolm anymore, but Malcolm did not let the moment pass like it was nothing. Because it wasn't nothing. The packet had been there. Time-stamped. Valid. And they still said no until proof forced the truth onto the counter. Malcolm kept his voice calm and low. I also want a copy of that timestamp for my records. Miss Klein paused, then nodded once. Of course. Mrs. Dalton's hands shook slightly as she reached for the copier. Aaliyah looked up at Malcolm, hope breaking through her fear. Daddy, she whispered, I'm going to school. Malcolm squeezed her hand gently. Yeah, he said, voice warm again. You are. But inside, he made himself a promise. He would keep receipts. He would keep stamps. He would keep proof. Because in places like this, being right wasn't enough. You had to be right on paper, and sometimes you had to make them read it out loud. The copier hummed behind the front counter, spitting out pages like the machine itself was trying to erase what had just happened by turning it into routine. Mrs. Dalton stood there feeding Malcolm's packet into the tray with stiff hands. Her face had that tight, defensive blankness people wear when they've been proven wrong, but refuse to look sorry about it. Ms. Klein watched the copier like she was watching a leak, focused, determined to contain it. Malcolm stayed calm. He didn't lean on the counter. He didn't stare anyone down. He simply stood with Aaliyah at his side, hand resting lightly on her shoulder, steadying her while his own pulse still ran hot beneath the surface. Aaliyah kept peeking up at the packet, at the stamp, like it was a magic ticket. Ms. Klein finally turned back to Malcolm. We'll need a few minutes to enter her into the system. Malcolm nodded. Take the time you need. Mrs. Dalton slid the copied page through the slot without meeting Malcolm's eyes. The copy showed the front page of the packet and the red stamp. Received, August 14th, 10:07 a.m. Malcolm took it and tucked it into his folder carefully. He didn't fold it. He didn't crumple it. He treated it like what it was, protection. Ms. Klein began typing, brisk and quiet. After a minute, she asked, You said you moved 2 blocks away? Yes, Malcolm replied. Mrs. Klein nodded once, then asked, Any special services? IEP, speech, anything we need to know? Malcolm glanced at Aaliyah. No, she's healthy, just new. Ms. Klein looked up briefly. Okay. Mrs. Dalton hovered behind her, still, arms crossed now like she wanted to armor herself. A minute later, Ms. Klein's screen seemed to resist. Her fingers paused, then tapped again. Ms. Klein frowned slightly. Huh. Malcolm's stomach tightened. He recognized the sound of another barrier loading. What? Malcolm asked calmly. Ms. Klein didn't look up. It's not letting me complete the enrollment. Mrs. Dalton spoke quickly, as if she'd been waiting for a chance to regain control. See? It's not in the system. Malcolm turned his eyes to Mrs. Dalton, calm, sharp. It wasn't in the system because it wasn't entered. The packet was received. That's not a debate. Mrs. Dalton's cheeks flushed. I'm just saying, Ms. Klein cut her off without looking back. Mrs. Dalton, please. Malcolm kept his voice even. What's blocking it, Miss Klein? Miss Klein clicked through a menu. A residency verification hold. Malcolm blinked. Hold? I provided proof of address, lease and utility start letter. Ms. Klein nodded. I see them here, uploaded. She paused. But the system's showing pending review. Mrs. Dalton's mouth tightened. We can't enroll without confirmed residency. Malcolm held her gaze. We live in the district, and you have the documents. Mrs. Dalton's tone sharpened. Documents can be... Malcolm cut in, still calm. Don't. The single word landed with quiet weight. Mrs. Dalton froze. Miss Klein finally looked up at Malcolm, measuring him. Mr. Reed, the hold is usually cleared within a few days. Malcolm kept his tone steady. School started this week. She can't wait a few days because your office didn't open a drawer. Ms. Klein's jaw tightened, not angry at him, more like she hated the system too. I can place her as provisional, Ms. Klein said slowly. But we need confirmation from the district office. Mrs. Dalton scoffed softly. That's not standard. Malcolm didn't look at her. Call them. Ms. Klein hesitated, then nodded and picked up the phone. Malcolm listened to the call as she spoke in the careful language of administrative power. Student record, residency hold, receipt stamp, urgent placement. While Ms. Klein waited on hold, Aaliyah whispered, "Daddy, am I in trouble?" Malcolm crouched again, voice gentle. "No, you're perfect. Adults are just slow sometimes." Aaliyah nodded, gripping her backpack strap. Miss Klein came back on the line and spoke to someone Malcolm couldn't hear. Her expression tightened, then softened slightly. "Yes," she said. "The packet is stamped. Yes, we have proof of address. Yes, the parent is present." She paused, then said, "Thank you." She hung up. Miss Klein looked at Malcolm. "Okay. District-approved provisional enrollment. She can start tomorrow." Aaliyah's eyes widened. "Tomorrow." Malcolm smiled softly. "Tomorrow." Aaliyah's shoulders loosened like she'd been holding her breath for an hour. Mrs. Dalton's face tightened again, and Malcolm could feel it, her irritation that this didn't end with, "Come back later." Ms. Klein printed a form and slid it through the slot. "This is her temporary enrollment confirmation. Class assignment will be finalized by end of week." Malcolm took it and read carefully. Aaliyah's name, grade, teacher, start date, tomorrow. He looked up. "I want to confirm something." Ms. Klein nodded. "Yes?" Malcolm kept his tone calm but precise. "This packet was time-stamped last Wednesday, so your office had it. Yet this morning I was told you had nothing. I want a note added to her file. Packet received August 14th, misfiled internally, found August dash." Mrs. Dalton's head snapped up. "That's unnecessary." Malcolm looked at her. "It's necessary for me." Miss Klein hesitated. "We don't typically—" Malcolm interrupted gently, still controlled. "Respectfully, you also don't typically deny a child enrollment after receiving her packet. But it happened. I need the record to reflect the truth so it doesn't happen again." Miss Klein stared at him for a beat. Then she nodded once. "I can add an administrative note." Mrs. Dalton's lips pressed together, eyes hard. Miss Klein typed, then said, "Done." Malcolm exhaled, slow, quiet. Not relief exactly, more like the sound of something locking into place. He tucked the provisional enrollment confirmation behind the stamped copy. Then he looked at Ms. Klein. "Thank you." Miss Klein nodded, slightly more human now. "We'll see her tomorrow. Tell her to bring her backpack and a brave heart." Aaliyah's mouth twitched into a small smile. Malcolm turned to leave. But before he did, he looked back at Mrs. Dalton, still behind the glass, still tight, still refusing eye contact. Malcolm didn't threaten. He didn't insult. He didn't raise his voice. He said quietly, clearly so the words couldn't be mistaken, "Next time a parent says they dropped something off, check the drawer before you tell a kid no." Mrs. Dalton's face flushed. Miss Klein didn't speak, but she didn't disagree either. Malcolm took Aaliyah's hand and walked out of Brookside Elementary. Outside, the air felt cleaner. Aaliyah bounced once, excitement returning like sunlight breaking through clouds. "Pancakes?" Malcolm smiled, genuine now. "Pancakes." They walked to the car, and Malcolm felt something settle in his chest. Not victory, not satisfaction, something steadier. He'd protected his daughter with paper and stamps and calm insistence. And he knew it wouldn't be the last time. But today, the time-stamped packet had done what Malcolm's voice alone couldn't. It made the office admit she belonged there, before she ever set foot in the classroom.